Welcome to the Manifestation and Money podcast, where we bridge the worlds of the taboo topic of money with the woo-woo world of manifestation. We're your hosts, Chris and Jenni Schultz.
We're not just about dollars and cents around here. We're all about lifestyle design. You can be working towards financial independence while still living a life you love today.
Get ready for insightful conversations with guests who have embraced the FIRE movement by achieving financial independence and retiring early, as well as entrepreneurs and individuals who defied the norm and have paved their own way to a life they love.
Together, we'll explore the powerful connection between mindset, financial freedom, and living a purposeful life. And of course, we'll be sharing our own journey to how we carved our path to a seven-figure net worth before hitting the big 4-0. Are you ready to ignite your financial future? Then let's dive right in.
Welcome to the Manifestation and Money podcast, where your journey to financial independence and the life you love begins now.
Imagine acquiring over 200 real estate doors in less than 3 years. My guest today is Zack Grey, and he is no stranger to carving his own path to financial independence. From food stamps and bankruptcy as a child, Zack has built himself an impressive resume, building a business and jumping at the opportunity of the multifaceted world of real estate. Whether you're an experienced real estate investor or just looking to start out, you'll find value in my conversation today with Zack. Welcome to the Manifestation and Money podcast, Zack.
Thank you so much for having me on today, and hopefully, we can talk some shop and I can bring some value to your prospective listeners.
Yeah, I am so excited to have you on the show today too, because honestly, I think in this inflationary world, the best way to combat inflation is cash flowing assets like real estate and business. And you kind of have your hands in both of those pies. I'm super excited to have you on today. If you could share with the listeners a little bit about who you are and what your story is.
Sure. So brief synopsis is I grew up in a relatively poor family. I ended up joining the military as a means to pay for college. I ended up going to school for 4 years to get a finance degree. I became a personal trainer, completely unrelated to my degree. Started my own fitness business, opened a gym. And then during COVID, obviously, gyms weren't really a thing. And so that's where I started to think critically about how to mitigate my biggest expenses and mitigate risk for me and my family. And I think that, I went to college and my degree was in finance to begin with. So I had decent financial literacy skills. I was always frugal and pretty, cost conscious growing up. So to that point, this is the time in which I started to explore avenues that would help me, again, mitigate my largest expenses, which at that point were my house payment and taxes. And so at that point, I decided the best option would be for me to start my own business and to sell my house and to get into a multifamily property so I could live cost-free. It took a pretty significant amount of convincing for my, at the time, fiance, now wife. We're now 3 years in. I've been able to compile about 240 rental units in 3 years. And I just am really blessed to be in the position that I'm in. And it just seems too good to be true at this point.
Yeah, you're riding a big snowball, like you started from little. So can we go back to that beginning point for you? Because I love house hacking, and the fact that you sold your house, can you explain what that looked like for the person listening who's like, oh, I could never get into real estate? I think house hacking is a way to do it.
Yeah, so to that point, I think house hacking is step one in order to help you facilitate the plan of financial independence for you and your family. And I think that originally I went into it with the mindset that I was going to buy one property per year as an owner occupant for 5 years. And that the idea would be that if I could find properties in which the remaining units would cover the cost of the mortgage, then essentially every unit that I lived in once I moved out would cash flow. And so with Massachusetts, our standard rental amount for an apartment is roughly around $2,000. So the way that I looked at it was if I had 5 of those, that would be $10,000 in cash flow. And I'd be able to support having essentially an additional salary. And it would give me a lot of flexibility for me to choose what I wanted to do with my time and my life at that point. And that would only bring me to about, I think, 31 or 32 years old at the time. So that was kind of my original plan. And that's where I started. And I think that's the avenue that everybody should start. I think that owning a single family home or owning a condo or owning a townhouse, that's a luxury. And I don't think everybody deserves that luxury. I think you earn that luxury. And so I think to that point, I think that starting in house hacking and doing it, 2, 3, 4, 5 years straight between, let's say I'm early 20s and maybe up until you're about 30 years old or low 30s, I think it's a super opportunistic option for you to be able to maximize your financial circumstances for your family indefinitely.
Yeah, I agree with that 110%. So we did just that, but we did the 5-house strategy, and that's just where we hang out. That's where it is. So I want to hear you. How many houses or how many doors did you say you're at in a 3+ year span here?
Yeah, so we went from a single townhouse to ownership stake in 240 apartments. And the biggest thing that I think that seems so daunting to a lot of people, and I can understand that. But I think that one of the things that people are not necessarily privy to or consider as an option is essentially buying into these properties that are house hacks and then utilizing the equity in the property as a line of credit. So essentially taking a line of credit against the property that you are living in. Banks are a lot more liberal in regards to how much money they will allow for you to take in the form of a line of credit if you are occupying the building. So to that point, if you're able to hypothetically take a line of credit, even if the interest rate is 8%, 9%, 10%, which is pretty significant, I would say that across every single deal that I have done to date, my average annual rate of return across the deal is roughly around 17 to 20% per year. Mm-hmm. And so to that point, if I can borrow money at 8% or 9%, but I can make 20%, right? You get to keep the delta. So if that's the case, you're making 11% off of money that would have been sitting idle doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the way that people need to view it. And frankly, this is the exact strategy that hedge funds use. Hedge funds take money, they basically pay a small nominal rate to have access to that money, and they deploy it opportunistically into avenues that they feel like will generate larger returns. And if you're diversified enough across as many different assets as possible, then essentially you're going to seize that opportunity and seize that benefit for yourself. And I think at the time of COVID, my primary concern was, how can I get access to as many buildings as possible? Because as the Fed continues to print money relentlessly, the more buildings I have, the more avenues I have to benefit from the appreciation that's about to happen as the Fed continues to print more and more and more money. So I didn't care about being hypothetically over leveraged. And particularly, I didn't care about being over leveraged because I didn't have any living expenses, right? I was living for free. So if I'm running my own business, living for free, and I could take my money that I was generating to cover my ass, sorry for the French, but essentially being able to cover myself for multiple different properties and being able to cover lines of credit, now I was in a position where I could benefit maximally from what was about to happen. And that was exactly the case.
I just think it's funny to play on words, the cover your ass with an asset. And by you buying into property and the government printing money, I read some stat this morning that I'm in Canada, but we kind of follow suit with whatever you guys are doing down there. It said that every 90 days, your government owns, I think it was $1 trillion in interest. So they have to keep printing more money so they can pay off their own debt. So that is just going to cause the price of assets to continue to inflate moving forward, right?
Yes. And to that same point, this is, again, what you started digging this hole. I'm going to step away for a second and kind of dive into a little bit of macroeconomics, but essentially you have a declining population globally, and you have a climate in the US that accepts nothing but growth, right? Those two things don't work together. You can't have a declining population and then perpetual growth, right? That's not possible. There's not enough consuming. There's not enough consumer spending to happen. So in order to do that, you have to essentially create false monetary circulation. And so in order to prop up the narrative, in order to fabricate growth, in order to continue to have the economy churn on all cylinders, the Fed has for a long time now been just perpetually printing and printing and printing and printing. And eventually you run out. It's not an option anymore. Or it's like a never ending cycle. And so when I became aware of this circumstance, it was either get with it or get left behind. And so it was at that time where I said, I need to buy as many assets as I can, get into as many multifamily properties as I can. And I picked multifamily largely because it's a commodity. It's a commodity that every single person in this country needs. And then what I also realized is that at the same time in which they were printing money relentlessly, they also dropped rates to the floor. So now what you did is you've created this microcosm that fosters vast amounts of economic growth. But when the lights go off, right, and the dust settles, now where we stand is that you've accumulated a vast number of assets at a low interest, which is really advantageous for you. You're going to be able to hold that debt for an elongated period of time. And then as asset prices continue to appreciate and you continue to benefit from the cash flow that they produce, as interest rates get hiked back up, now what you're going to have is you're going to have a whole large quantity of people who cannot afford the houses that exist because the asset prices have escalated so rapidly. And now when you pair rapid price escalation with low inventory due to the fact that nobody who has a mortgage at 3% is going to be selling, and now in order to rectify this, put the brakes on the inflation, you got rates at 7-8%. Now what ends up happening is you create basically a housing crisis. And when people can't buy houses, guess what they have to do? They have to rent. So I was 3 steps ahead looking at this from a fortuitous standpoint, saying, if the government does, this is what will happen. When the next step happens, this is what will happen. And I looked at it saying 3 moves down the line, when every single person has to deal with high housing prices and high interest rates at the same time, it's checkmate. And if you're the one who's holding all the multifamily, right, you're cleaning up.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you're not doing the strategy anymore that you are living in the place, so you're taking out your line of credit with the amount of doors you have now. So what is your new strategy?
So our new strategy is, we still do use lines of credit on properties that we acquire. But what I will say is that we're at a point now where we raise capital from investors to fund deals that we come across. And I think a couple things that we do from a differentiation standpoint relative to our competitors is I think that we actually garner a larger equity split. So we ask for a 50-50 equity split versus a traditional 60-40 or 70-30 model. And why we're able to garner that split is really 2 reasons. One is that whatever preferred return that we offer, so whatever return we offer our investors on their money, we actually personally guarantee the return. So essentially, we're guaranteeing a floor for the investor at roughly 8% or so. That's step 1. And then I'm happy to talk about like how we're able to do that. But I think that the variable that really allows for us to garner that 50-50 split is that when we go to refinance a property, what is standard is that when you refinance a property and you do a cash out refinance, you habitually will split the proceeds relative to ownership stake in the property. So essentially, if we are 50-50 holders, half of the money would go to the investors and half the money would go to us as operators. Well, what we do is we actually provide 100% of refinance funds to investors. Now, there's 2 things that happen because of this. The investor gets all of their money back far more rapidly. So now what ends up happening is the second that they get their funds back more rapidly, now what ends up happening is because all of the equity that has been gained was a 50-50 split, now we have equal ownership stake in the property. So what this does is it aligns incentives because now we are just as likely to want to hold or to sell as our investors, and the outcome is the same. So now there's not a dispute between us in regards to what we want to do with the property. We're synergistically incentivized to want the same outcome. Secondarily, when we provide all of our capital back to our investors, it provides basically a higher rate of return because they're able to redeploy it into other opportunities. Now, this is kind of our model. The last piece that kind of brings this full circle is that most of the operators in our market are able to execute their business plan in 2 to 3 years. We have been executing our business plan on 12 to 18 month timelines. So what this now corresponds to is we are operating at a 2x speed. And then when we refinance, we're providing 2x the monetary value back. So in reality, every person in our market, if they invest with us, gets 4x the benefit on their money. They're getting 2x the velocity and then 2x the refi amount. So they're getting 4x their money in terms of return velocity. And why this matters is that if we're able to continue this, that means they're able to put money into a deal, reap the money back out, and then redeploy it into another opportunity every single year, which now allows for them to basically collect a revenue stream every year that they continue to own, they continue to hold ownership stake in, while they're continuously recycling the same bucket of capital to continue to acquire revenue streams. And this is what this is how we talk about this philosophically to our investors. And I think when you start talking about collecting revenue streams and assets like their trading cards, I think that people look at that and say, this is too good to be true. And where, how can I get involved?
Yeah. And I bet you have a huge retention rate, because if you're getting the person's money back faster to them, they're not going to be looking somewhere else to put their money. They're going to say, hey, Zach, what else do you guys have? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. That's fascinating. And you guys have a proven track record. You have skin in the game. You're in it with them. And I like how it kind of comes out at an even playing field.
And one of the other things that we do is we actually, every single month, we put out a monthly newsletter that goes over monthly updates on every single project that we have going on. And so this also creates a situation for investors where rather than the investors having to nag us for updates, they're getting monthly updates as to what's going on with the deal and what's going on with their money. So they love it because they feel like they kind of have a microscope into what's going on. And there's no sort of ambiguity as to the status of the deal.
And I bet that frees things up on your guys' end too. You're not having to deal with a whole bunch of people coming at you with questions. You're providing the information up front for everybody to see.
Exactly.
Cool. I love that. So where can the listeners reach out to you and find more of you and maybe get on that newsletter list?
So yeah, people can reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at the 1099 mindset. Our company name is called Freedom Management. If you friend me on Facebook, it's Zack Grey, ZackGray. And if you friend me on Facebook, you'll get a whole flurry of investor tips, updates on our deals, and then access to our newsletter as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Zach.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that there was some value to be taken out in regards to deal structure and how to get involved at first in regards to real estate, and also just like how to think about utilizing your own money to maximize your earnings.
Yeah, I think you really covered all the bases there for somebody who's just newly looking to get into the game versus the person who wants the hands-off approach. Take my money, invest it in real estate. You go do the work. I'll just keep collecting the money from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that so much. Thanks again. Hey, wait, before you go, do you want to increase your income by $1,000 a month? If so, check out our free side hustle guide at www.fourleaflifestyle.com/money ideas. I'll pop it in the show notes for easy access.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Manifestation and Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to continue your journey to financial empowerment and creating a life you love, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.
Come follow us on Instagram at Manifestation and Money Podcast or at 4Leaf Lifestyle for more inspiration and behind the scenes content. Remember, your life is yours to live. Your financial freedom journey is as unique as you are. So hop in the driver's seat. It's time to create the life of your dreams.